Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In my previous videos, we explored the internal workings of Spring Security and implemented a custom username password authentication system step by step. If you haven't checked those videos out yet, make sure to give them a watch after this one. Today we are taking things up a higher level as we deep dive into JWT authentication, a modern and a powerful way to secure your applications. We will be covering access tokens, refresh tokens, and implementing JWT authentication in a Spring Security setup. By end of this video, you will have a solid understanding of JWTs and how to use them effectively in your applications. Alright, let's jump straight into it. So what is JSON Web Token or JWT? It is a standard for securely transmitting information as a JSON object, used for authenticating and information exchange in web applications. JWTs are compact, self-contained, and can be verified because they are digitally signed using a secret key or a public-private key pair. So the structure of JWT consists of three parts: the header, the payload, and the signature. These parts are encoded using base 64 and concatenated with dots. The header contains two fields: the type of the token, which is JWT in our case, and the signing algorithm being used, such as HS256 or RS256. So this is the example of header where we specify in a JSON object the algorithm and the type. The second part is the payload, and it contains the claims. So what are claims? So claims are statements about an entity such as user data and additional metadata. There are three types of claims: registered claims, which are predefined claims like issuer, expiration, issued at, and subject. Second is public claims. These are the custom claims that are defined by the user, and there can be private claims as well that are agreed upon between the two parties. So here in our example, we have three claims. Subject and issued at are registered claims, while name is a public claim. So the third part is the signature, which is created by taking the encoded header, the encoded payload, and signing them using a secret or a private key. So now before we implement JWT authentication, let's quickly discuss its pros and cons. So the first advantage is it is compact and it's small in size, which makes them efficient for transmission via HTTP headers or cookies. So they are self-contained. They carry all the information needed for authentication, so there is no dependency or server-side sessions. And the third one is security. As we know, JWTs are digitally signed, ensuring that data cannot be tampered with. And the fourth one is cross-domain support. So they work seamlessly across different domains, which is great for microservices and APIs. But of course, no technology is without its trade-offs. So let's discuss the disadvantages as well. So the first one is non-revocability. So once a token is used, it cannot be revoked. If compromised, you are stuck unless an expiration is set or a server-side blacklist is implemented. The second can be the large payload. So storing too much information in the token can increase its size, impacting the performance. As a good practice, JWT's size should be less than 4 KB. So the third one is JWTs can be vulnerable if they are not properly configured. So misconfigurations such as weak signing algorithms or insecure secrets can compromise the security. So these are critical to keep in mind when designing a secure JWT based system. Here is an example of what a JWT looks like in action. This simple example shows the three components I mentioned earlier: the header, payload, and the signature. Now that we understand the theory, let's deep dive into the implementation. I will walk you through how to set up JWT authentication in a Spring Security project step by step. We will handle both the access tokens and refresh tokens to ensure a robust and a secure solution. So I have created a Spring Boot application. Let's go through the pom.xml file. So in pom.xml file, I have just added the Spring Security Starter Web, Data JPA, and the library JWT. So this library helps us in generating and validating the JWT tokens in our application. So I will be using H2 database as an in-memory database to store users, roles, their mappings, as well as refresh tokens. First, we need to create the entities that are required. So in the previous video, I have created user and role entities. I've just copied it here as well, just to save the time. Let's go through that. So let's go through the role entity first. So the role contains the ID and the name of the role, and the name of the table for role is roles. Let's go through the user entity. So the name of the user entity table is users, and it implements the user details. As this object is returned by the JWT Service, so that's why we have implemented it here itself. And it contains the ID, username, and password. And it has many-to-many relationship with the role entity, because many users can have many roles, and many roles can be associated with many users. So that's why we have created a many-to-many relationship here. So the third table will be created with the name user_roles, and it will contain the user and the roles mapping. So the getAuthorities method comes from the user details, and we have overridden this method. This is required because we want to convert our role names into simple granted authority, as this is the standard for storing the authorities in an authentication object in Spring Security. So the next entity that we will be creating is the refresh token in order to store our refresh tokens. So let's create it. So it will be an entity. It will be refresh tokens. So it will be containing an ID, long ID, and a token, and the expiry date, It will be of type JWTUtil, and the status, whether it's revoked or not. And this refresh token will be associated to the user. There will be one-to-one mapping for the user. So let's add the ID annotations as well. So it will be an ID, and its generated value strategy will be generated value dot generated type dot identity. The token should be unique and it should not be null. For expiry date, it should not be null. So I'll just copy it. Let's delete this unique flag, and the revoked will also be nullable. It should not be null as well. We'll put the annotation here as well. So for user, we have one-to-one mapping, and we need to fetch it lazily whenever required. And the join column name will be user ID. Next, we will be creating the constructors and getters and setters. We will also require a no argument constructor as well. So that's it for the refresh token entity. So now we can create the repositories for user and refresh token. So let's create it. So it will be an interface repo, and it should extend the JPA repository. And the entity will be user, and the ID will be long, and it will be of type repository. And there should be only one method which will just return the user by its username. Found by username. It will be string username. So that's it for the user repository. Let's create the refresh token repository as well. Interface refresh token repository. It should also be of type repository, and it should be extending the JPA repository as well. And the entity will be refresh token, and the ID will be long. It should contain two methods. First one will return a refresh token for a user. Refresh token. First we will just do it find by token, and we will pass the token itself. Let's import it. And to get all the tokens for a user, list of refresh tokens, and we need to find by user's name. You should be capital here, and we will just provide this username here. So that's it for refresh token repository. So next we will be writing the custom user details service. Custom user details service. This service should implement user details service. Implements user details service, and it should be of type service as well. And we need to implement the methods here. So there is only one method, load user by username. So we will inject our repository here, private user repo. As you can see, it returns a user details. So that's why we have implemented the user details into our user entity. So now we can just return it directly by finding it by using our user repo dot find by username, and we will just pass on the username. And since it returns an optional, we need to handle that as well. We can throw a new exception called username not found exception, and we can just say user not found. So that's it for custom user details service. So next we will be creating some DTOs that will be required. So first one will be the auth request. We can create it as a record, and it should contain the string password, and this will be used while we are logging in. The next one will be for the auth response. It should also be a record. So the auth response will return the access token as well as the refresh token. So next we will be creating the error response. If there is any error, we can return this error response. It should be record as well, and it should only contain a message field. That's it. We also require one for the refresh token request. Should also be a record, and it should only contain the refresh token field. Next we will be creating JwtUtil class that will help us in creating or validating the refresh tokens. So let's create it. In the util package, you can just create it JwtUtil. It should be of type component. It should contain a logger. Let's create a logger first. We have type slf4j, and the factory should be of the same. It should also contain these three variables that we will be reading from application.properties file. So the first one will be the JWT secret, using which we will be signing our JWT token, and which will help us in validation so that we know our JWT token is not tampered in between. So the second value will be JWT expiration in milliseconds. So we'll be taking this value in order to set the validity for the generated JWT, and this property will be used for the refresh token expiration time. So I've defined it in my application.properties here. So this is in milliseconds, so it means 30 minutes, and this means 24 hours. So this secret key should come from environmental variables and should not be a plain text inside your application.properties. So for this demo only, I've just pasted it here directly, but this is not recommended for production. So this secret is base64 encoded secret, and it has to be of 32 bytes. I've generated it using the below code. Please use this for generating your own secret key. I can just comment it for now. So let's go back to our JWTUtil class. So we need to create a key variable, Java security key variable. This is because we need to convert our JWT secret into the key, because that is required by the JWT library in order to sign the JWT. So we can do that in the post construct method. So first we will be decoding the JWT secret byte array, and then we can use the keys.hmac key for keys method to generate the key. So let's create the generate token method. So it will be returning us a string, which will be the JWT token. The method will be generate token. It will be taking an authentication object. We will extract the username from the authentication. We will create a date variable. We will set the date expiry date as well. We'll create the expiry date variable that will be taking the current time. Should be now here. Let us call it now. Now dot get time plus we will just add the expiration time in milliseconds to set the validity for our generated JWT. So now we can use the JWTs builder from JWT library to create the JWT. The subject, we need to import that. So the subject will be the username that we have extracted, and it should be issued. The issue date will be issued at will be the now date. The expiration will be the expiry date, and we need to sign the JWT now. We will be using sign with key, and the key will be the key that we have generated on 35 line. And next we populate the claims in the JWT. So for the claims, it requires a map. So we want the key will be the roles, as we need to populate the granted authorities into that. So we will just say it should be named roles. Let's import map. And for getting the authorities, we can get the authorities from the authentication object, get authorities dot stream. We need to convert it into the role names. We can just extract the name of the granted authority, get authority, and then we can just collect it to the list. That's it for the JWT generation, and then we can just call compact in order to create it. So that's it for the generate token method. So we just extract the username, then we created the now date, and we set the expiry date as well. Similarly, we can create the generate refresh token method as well. It's the same. So we will be having the now date, expiry date, and we just create the refresh token. So the next helper method can be get username from token method. We will be requiring that to extract the username from the claims. So it will be accepting a token, and it will be parsing the token to get the claims. And after the claims are processed, we can get the subject from the claims, because anyways we are setting the subject as username itself. So that's why we can just get the subject. We will get the username. I will just import this. We will be using the secret key also in order to verify the token. So we will be requiring two more helper methods. One is for validating the token, and second one is for getting the refresh expiration time in milliseconds, and they will look like this. So the validate token will try to verify the token with our secret key, and it will try to parse the signed claims as well. If everything is fine, then it is returning a true. Otherwise, it can throw these types of exceptions. There can be a signature exception if the signature is not valid. It can be malformed exception if the token is malformed. If the token is expired, then it will throw an expired JWT exception. And if the generated JWT is not supported, then it will throw unsupported exception. And expiration in milliseconds, I've just returned the value for this variable here. That's it. So this is our JWT.util class. So next we will be creating the AuthController that will handle the login, logout, and the refresh endpoints for our application. So let's create that. I'll create a new controller called AuthController. It will be a REST controller. It should contain the request mapping /API/auth. So let's create the login endpoint. It should be a post mapping. It should return the response entity, and it should say login, and it accepts auth request record that we have created earlier. And we will be creating an auth service for which we will be calling the login method with this auth request. Same, we need to create it for the refresh token as well. So this will say login, and this will be refresh. It will accept the refresh token request. It will say refresh token request, and it will also return the response entity. Similarly, we need to do it for logout. Let's quickly create that. Logout, it will say logout, and here it should say refresh token, and it will only send the HTTP servlet request. We only need that. It should say logout. We just need to pass the HTTP servlet request. So now let's create the authentication service. Go to here and we will say auth service, and it should be of type service. We can inject the service here, and we can create the methods from here itself. First one is created, second one is also created, third one is also created now. So now we need to implement these three methods in our authentication service. So this authentication service will be requiring some dependencies. First one is the authentication manager. The second one will be this util that we have created, JWT util. Third one will be the custom user detail service that we have created. Should be auto-wired private custom user detail service. And the last one will be the object mapper. We will be requiring the object mapper. We also require the token repository here, refresh token repository, private refresh token repository. So in this login method, we will first try to attempt the authentication. If authentication is successful, we will be generating the JWT token as well as the refresh token. We will also save the refresh token into the database for that particular user. So let's write that logic. So in the try catch block, we can first try to attempt the authentication. We can use authenticate method manager.authenticate, and here we need to provide the username password authentication token, and we need to pass the username and password that comes from the auth request username. The next one will be the auth request dot password. If authentication is successful, we can get the user details from authentication.get principal, and we can cast it to our user. In the next step, we'll try to generate the JWT. So we will be using JWTUtil.generate token, and we need to pass the authentication object to it. So now the JWT is generated, we need to generate the refresh token. So the refresh token, we can use the same method from the JWTUtil class to generate the refresh token, and we will be passing the username userdetails.get username. Once the refresh token is generated, we need to persist that into the database as well. So we can just save that refresh token, we can get the entity. So once the refresh token is generated, we can create the refresh token entity, and then we can save it into the database. So let's create the refresh token entity. Let's call it refresh token entity, and we can just use the constructor for refresh token. We will be passing the refresh token here first. Second, it requires the expiry date. We can create a date here itself, date from, and it will be java.util date, say instant. We can just say instant.now dot plus millis, and we can get the get refresh expiration in milliseconds. And the next, we will need to pass the user details here. So now the refresh token entity object has been created. We can use the refresh token repository to save it into the database. That's it. The refresh token is now saved into the database. Now we can just return the response to the client, response entity.new. We can just pass the auth response, which will contain the JWT as well as the refresh token. And if any error occurs, it will be cached in our catch block, and we can just return a new response saying invalid credentials or login error. We can just return the error response, and we can just say invalid credentials or login error. It should not be okay. The status should be a bad request. Status will be http status dot bad request, and it should be part of body. And that's it for the login method. So let's write the logic for the refresh token method. So here we will be getting the refresh token in the refresh token request, and just extract that refresh token dot refresh token. Next, we will try to get it from the database if the same token exists in the database as well. So next, we will be using the refresh token repository to find the token. Call it refresh token from DB. So before processing this object, we need to make some validations, whether it is empty or it has not been expired or it is revoked or not. So all those kind of checks we need to put. So first one will be the it is empty check. If it is empty, or we need to get the expiry date, and it should be before new of date, and there will be an or condition as well, refresh token DB if it is get dot is revoked. So if any of the above case is true, we can throw an error saying invalid refresh token. Let's do that. We need to return a response entity, and the status will be unauthorized dot unauthorized, and the body will contain the error response, and it should say invalid refresh token. It's invalid. And if the refresh token is valid, then we can create a new JWT and a new refresh token, and then save it into the database. So let's extract the refresh token first. Refresh token, we can say valid refresh token, and we can just extract it from refresh from db.get from this token. We can also get the user details from it. User details valid refresh token dot get user. Then we can create a new JWT string, new JWT util JWT generate token. We need to provide a authentication object. We can create a username password authentication object here as well. We will just pass the user details. Password can be null for now. User details dot get authorities. Next, we'll be creating a new refresh token as well. New refresh token by using the JWTUtil dot generate refresh token. We can just use the user details dot get username method, and that's it. Now both the tokens are created. So now we can save the new refresh token into the database. So let's do that. Valid refresh token dot set token will be the new refresh token, and valid refresh token dot set expiry date will be date dot from now, and we need to just plus the milliseconds, and we can just get the JwtUtil.get refresh expiration in milliseconds from the JWT. And then we can just save it to the database. Save valid refresh token. So that's it. Now we can return a response entity back to the client, response entity, which will say, and it will just send the auth response with the new JWT and the new refresh token. There's a typo here. So that's it. We can also put it into the try catch block in order if there is any error in between, and if we can catch this exception, and we can just say the same thing here as well. You can say it is unauthorized, and the board will say invalid refresh token. So that's it for the refresh token. So next we'll be writing the logout logic. So in the token functionality, we will try to get the JWT token from the authorization header, and then we will get the username from the token, and after that we will try to get all the refresh tokens associated with that user, and we will mark them as revoked, and after that we can just send logged out successfully. And if there is any error in between, we can say an internal server error, logout failed, something like that, right? So let's do that. We can do the try catch thing again. So first we will try to get the auth header. Auth header will take the HTTP servlet request dot get header, and it should be the authorization. So if auth header is not equal to null and auth header dot starts with bearer, we'll just get the JWT from there. Auth header dot substring of 7. We will get the username from the JWT token using the JwtUtil class. Get username from the token JWT. Next we will try to get all the refresh tokens associated with this username, and we will mark them as revoked. So we are just using the find by user username method, and we're passing the username. We'll get all the refresh tokens associated to this user, and we will loop around that and mark all of them as revoked, and then we will just save that in our database. So here we need to return it, return response entity dot, we can just say logged out successfully. That's it. And if there is any error exception, we can just say similar to like this here, but here should be internal server error, and we can just say logout failed. So that's it for the authentication service. So we have the login refresh token as well as the logout functionality ready. So next we will be writing the JwtAuthenticationFilter that will be validating our JWT token and stores the authentication object into the security context holder. So let's jump into that. So in the filter section, we need to create new filter called JwtAuthenticationFilter, and it should implement the once per request filter, and it should be of type component. We need to implement the methods. There is only one method, do filter internal method, that we need to implement for this filter. So we will be requiring the JWT class, as well as we will require the CustomUserDetailsService. Yep, so that's it. So let's create a helper method for getting the JWT from the header. This will do that. String JWT get JWT from request, and we will just pass on the request here. We will check for some validations using string utils dot has text JWT, or we will just try to we will just try to validate it with the JWTutil class dot validate token. We will just pass the JWT. We will get the username from the JWT using the same JWTutil class get username from token JWT. So next we will be using the CustomUserDetailsService to get the user details, and then we will be creating a username password authentication token, and then we will just save that token into the security context holder. So let's do that. So we are getting the user details from the CustomUserDetailsService, and then we are creating a username password authentication token. We also need this step for the request, and then we can just save that to the security context holder. Next we can call the doChain method, doFilter method, and we can just pass the request and response for further filters. So that's it for this filter. What's the error? Oh, I think it's an extends here, not the implements. It will be extends here. That's fine. So next we will be creating JwtAuthenticationEntryPoint. The main purpose of this will be to catch all the authentication exceptions related to JWT. So let's create that authentication entry point, and it should implement authentication entry point, and it should also be a bean. So we will mark it as component, and there is only, it should be point here, and it has only one method that we need to implement, that will be commence, to just send the message unauthorized. So we have created all the classes now. So the last thing pending is the security configurations. So let's do that. Let's create a class called security config, and it should be a type of configuration, and we should do enable web security here. It should expose a bean of type security filter chain, So we will be requiring JwtAuthenticationFilter here, JwtAuthenticationFilter. We will also require entry point that we have created. We will also expose a bean of authentication manager, authentication configuration it is, and we will just return the default authentication manager. That's it. And we will also create a bean for the password encoder. Now we can just write our security filter chain. So it will just take an object of HTTP security, HTTP, and we can just say return HTTP dot build. So now before moving on, so I've created a test controller. We have created two endpoints, secured and unsecured. So after logging in, we will try to access the secured endpoint using the JWT, and we will also try to access the unsecured endpoint without any JWT. So we will be configuring those in our security configs here. So we need to disable the frame options for HTTP console, frame options. We can just say frame options config dot disable. The next we can just say request matchers. First we want the test secured endpoint to be only accessed by the admins only, who has role admin. The next request matcher will be for test secured only. It should be authenticated. Test secured should be authenticated. And the next request matchers will be for our public endpoints. We need to permit all of them, so they can be public and can be accessed by anyone, and any other requests should be authenticated. So by default, Spring Security CSRF filter will block all the put, post, patch, delete requests. So we will write some patterns to ignore from the CSRF. So we need to do that config. So for that we need to just create the handler CSRF config dot, and then we can just say under here itself ignore request and request matchers. So here we will be providing the auth endpoints as well as for the H2 console, because these are all the post request. You just paste these patterns here. So it's a semicolon missing here. So the next one will be the exception handler that we need to configure. So here we will be passing our HTTP secure handler configurer. We need to configure the authentication entry point, and we will provide the JWT authentication entry point that we have created here as the entry point. The next one we will be we need to add our filter. We will be just adding it before the username password authentication filter. So this is the JWT authentication filter, and it will be before username password authentication filter dot class. And the last one will be to provide the session management. Since JWT is stateless, so we need to provide the session strategy, session creation policy as stateless. So we don't want any sessions to be generated. So as we discussed in the advantages section, we don't need to maintain any session. So it's stateless, and all the information is required for the server is included in the request itself. So before starting the application, let's put a debug point here as well, debug true. So this will print all the filters that are configured in Spring Security. So let's start the application in debug mode. So you can see our application is up and running. So let's go to the postman, and we'll try to access the unsecured endpoint first without any authentication token. So we will be able to access it. Yes, we can access it now. Let's explore the secured endpoint. We have not provided any bearer token, so we should get an unauthorized error. So we are getting an unauthorized because we are not passing any token here. So let's try to log in into the system. I'm just giving the username and password that we have configured in our data.sql file. Let me open the H2 console as well. Let me go to Google Chrome. So here, this is our H2 console. I will just put a password, which is password itself. The connection is successful. So we can see the user is admin. We have already configured. The role is also configured for that, role admin, and the role mapping, the role user mapping is also there. User ID 1 has a role ID 1. And there are no refresh tokens as of now because we have not logged into the system yet. So let's log in. So let's try to log in. So once we logged in, we get the access token and the refresh token. Let's try to see the contents of this token. So we will just take this token and we will go to jwt.io website and we will paste this token. You can see the subject, the username will be admin, and it has the issued at and expiry time, and the roles are the claims that we have populated. We have populated the granted authorities into that, so that's why it's the role admin here. So this is how your JWT token will look like, and this says invalid signature. So if we go back to our application and we'll just get the secret, I will just copy this secret. I'll go back to the website again. If I paste it here, then it will say signature is verified. So in this way, your JWT token will be verified in the backend. So let's see the logs as well. So in the logs, we can see in the security filter chain, our JWT authentication filter has been configured. Now let's try to access the secured endpoint using the access token that we have received. I'll just copy this access token and I will try to access the secured resource. I'll just put on the token. I'm getting, see, this is a secured endpoint. So it means this request is successful. So this token is working. If we can see into the H2 console, if we go to the refresh tokens entity, and we can see that there is one refresh token that has been saved and its revoked status is false. So we can use this refresh token to generate a new token as well as a new refresh token. So let's do that. So the refresh endpoint expects a refresh token in the body. So we will just copy paste that we get it from login. So this is the refresh token that we got. So we will just use that in our refresh token body request. And if we send this, we will get a new access token and the new refresh token. So we can use this new access token now to access the secure resource. So it's also working. So last what we can try is we can revoke the refresh token if the token is being compromised and we don't want to generate new refresh tokens and new tokens. So the latest refresh token that we have got is this one. So we need to make it as revoked so that we cannot get a new access token from this refresh token. So let's go into our database. We just refresh it and we will make the status as true. So that's it. Now the token has been revoked. So if we just run it again, it's true now. So it has been revoked now. So I cannot use the same refresh token. So let's test it. So I will just copy this refresh token and I will try to generate a new access token from this. So if I send the request now, so I'm getting invalid refresh token. So in this way, we can revoke the refresh token in case our JWT token is compromised. So let's try the logout endpoint now. So when we will try to log out, so it will revoke the refresh token associated with that particular user. So if I just paste the token here, so first we will extract the username from this token and then we revoke the refresh token associated with that user. Try to do the logout. See, logout is successful. So if we go back to the H2 console, we refresh this, we can see it has been revoked now. So that's it from this video. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Let me know your thoughts or questions in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. Check out the description for the repo link. Until next time, keep learning and coding. See you in the next video.